Hi, I'm Meredith. This is Harrison, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast that uses data and analytics to give you the edge on Formula One betting lines. We have just finished qualifying in Canada, and I say it so dramatically because it was so dramatic. To echo Harrison's voice earlier, we are cooking. We are cooking. We are
We're
three for
cooking.
three. It seems that we may be 3 for 3 on our bets from earlier in the week. And just to run through those before we jump into the whys and the hows, we had Yuki Tsunoda in the points. That was minus 160 odds. I feel good about that. We had Lando podium finish, and that was minus 200 odds. I think we're good on that. And then finally, we had the close race bet or the margin of victory bet, which was plus 250. And I think, again, with the chaos that was Canadian qualifying, we feel like we're in a pretty good position with that. So those are our bets going into the week. We did those on Tuesday. Harrison, what are we going to look at today for new bets?
I think we can call the race winner. I think we know as soon as Q3 was over, we know who's going to cross the line. We know who's going to finish in P1. The crazy thing here that I want to talk about is the books are not reflecting this value.
Really?
There is a mismatch here between what's actually going on track and what's actually happened on the betting odds. We are going to use for this example Bovado, but you can also find these odds on FanDuel currently. Let's deep dive. Yeah, so I think there's a ton of value tomorrow in Max to win. I think anytime you can find Max at minus odds, minus 100 odds, minus 100 anything for Max to win after you've gotten through qualifying where we have a ton of data, like this is an easy bet for us. Here's why. One, Max set the fastest lap of qualifying. He's only starting the race P2 because he set the time the same time as Russell did after Russell did. But the important piece was the track was worse then. If you look at the session, as the session went on, when Mercedes and when McLaren set their, specifically Piastri, set his new tire laps kind of midway through Q3, the track was the best. And after that, the track got worse. So even though Max and Russell set identical track times, Max did it in a place where the track had less grip. So the fact that Formula One bettors still think that Max is not a larger favorite than minus 145 is a real struggle because the biggest championship fight that we're going to see is between Max and Charles. Charles starts P11, right? We know the Ferraris didn't get this right. So here's what's going to happen. The race is going to start on the run down to turn one. Max is going to bully Greg Russell off the track. I mean, in essence, George Russell has an opportunity to either go off track because Max is pushing him there or accept P2. There is a 10% chance that Max doesn't own P1 going into the second corner, and the only way that doesn't happen is if George actually puts his elbows out and gets a better start than Max, which won't happen. If that does happen, I don't think that he can keep Max behind for the entire stint. The second piece
Yeah.
about this is I think George is going to be a great buffer to Lando, right? I think Max gets George in lap one. I think it takes maybe two, maybe three laps for the McLaren to be able to get there. Now, this is a great fight between Lando and Max for the win, but track position matters here. You know, if we look at Danny Ricciardo's win in 2014, the only reason that he was able to pass those cars for the finish is because Nico Rosberg had an ERS failure, right? We know that the Mercedes at that current point couldn't get its energy recovery system, and Daniel passed him for the win. You're not going to see that at this race because fundamentally it's a lot like Imola, right? If we look at our one thing I absolutely love is Hollis, one of my favorite Formula One accounts, F1 Big Data, give them a shout out. They actually look at tracks. So let's look at similarity between the racetracks. When we look at Montreal, when we look at the circuit, it's super similar to Shanghai. It's super similar to Miami. Tracks where, well, Red Bull had the fastest car, but McLaren was also really close. So not only do I think Max wins, but I also feel that the bet we called earlier in the week, where we knew Lando was going to finish in the podium, has even more value now because, one, I realistically think George could finish P4. I don't know if he finishes on the podium. I think he's there are 3 cars that are faster than him, and we don't know how Mercedes tire wear is. We know Mercedes tire wear hasn't necessarily been great over a stint. We know that the McLaren's pretty good on a stint. We also know that the McLaren is pretty good on the hard tire, right? We know that a lot of races is going to be on the hard tire. So once again, McLaren are in a good place tomorrow, starting, P3, P4, starting on the second row. I don't really think George has the long run pace. Mercedes really haven't done their work about how the hard tire is going to work. Max has the max factor. Lando is not going to run into his. He does not need to run Max off the track to win this race. And I think Max is going to do everything he can to respond to a very bad Monaco and show that Red Bull are still the fastest car. So, yeah, I like Max to win tomorrow. I think other people will be saying that, but the analysis is important.
Yeah. Okay. So let's unpack. To recap, that bet was Max at minus odds to win the race. And I love the analysis on that. I think it's a really good point. We've had this series of races here. We've had Miami, we've had Imola, we've had Monaco, weird outlier. Now we've got Canada. I think it's really important to look at like 2014. And as a relatively new Formula One fan, that is not something I don't really know the ins and outs of Canada. But if you're saying, potentially Max could get ahead by corner two, then Max is going to win. I mean, unless there is something catastrophic to happen, without the Lando pressure from lap two, I think you're kind of right. This may be something where he can build enough of a gap. And again, the odds on this are what I feel really comfortable with. It does harken back to our previous bet with the Lando on the podium. I think if we can still get odds on that, that is one that I feel pretty comfortable with. And just to kind of circle back to that bet, looking at bets earlier in the week, I think it would have been really easy to pick Ferrari in that spot rather than Lando. And what we've seen with these McLarens is that I think it's a little bit more of top line efficiency. Now, did Ferrari get the tire strategy wrong in qualifying? Yeah, probably. But I think the Lando bet feels a little bit more steady. And I think the max to win bet is a great one that we can put down post qualifying. So just to recap, Max Verstappen minus 145 odds. So if you put down 100, you could potentially win $68.97. I love those numbers. And I think that's a great bet in addition to our Yuki in the points, Lando on the podium, and then the margin for the time margin for victory. And just to kind of recap, we did have that Lando bet. And earlier in the week, I feel like that very much could have been Ferrari, who did not even make it to Q3. And one of the things that we've promised here at P1 Picks is that we do like to look at data and analytics going into these betting odds. What is this showing us here, Harrison, in terms of the Ferrari tire strategy, and why didn't they qualify higher today?
So I think the important piece here is that the track was cold. There was low grip. It's been raining all weekend. I think Ferrari just struggled to get the tire in the right working temperature window, right? We fundamentally know that peak grip and the red is going to be qualifying, right? So when we're looking at that qualifying temperature, it's going to be a higher average temperature than we know that they're going to use in the race. And we know that Ferrari, if we look back and think a little bit to their performance in um, China, we know that they didn't really fail to get the tire in the right window, right? They have a fast car, but if you don't get the tire warmed up properly, you're never going to see that peak grip. I think that's also what you're seeing from Sergio, right? Sergio, rather than saying, so Sergio struggled, he didn't make it out of Q3, Sergio struggled to get enough heat in that temperature in that or first lap so that he couldn't qualify. He couldn't get the peak grip of the tire and really didn't have enough grip to qualify. I think that's the same thing that we're seeing for the Ferraris. But the interesting piece is I think Ferrari's going to be in a great place for the race. Here's why. As the working temperature range of the tire for the race is lower than the temperature for qualifying, I think the teams that had a really good qualifying, Aston Martin, Mercedes, are going to slide back in the race because they're going to see overheating issues. They're going to see a lot of degradation. So I think even though Ferrari qualified in a bad place, as they make this tire work, their car is set up to work about a lower working range of this tire. So that lower working range means the tire should last longer, it should degrade less, and they shouldn't have the peakiness. They might not have the grip lap one, but as you lap 5, lap 10, if you want to look at having a one-stop race, Ferrari should be in a good place because the working range of their tire is lower than the other teams. And especially, I think that Mercedes and Aston Martin are going to get called out because they've seen really high degradation. And just because you're able to qualify well does not mean that you're able to do this race, which is potentially shaping up to be a one-stop. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that it's faster to run a two-stop race here and it take another 23, 21-second pit stop hit for a new set of tires when potentially degradation. We don't know what deg is going to be because we haven't seen a ton in FP3. So deg could be high, deg could be medium. It seems like deg has been a little bit on the higher piece. So maybe that two-stop race is what a lot of the teams are thinking about. But if that's a two-stop race and Ferrari is able to have great pace at the end of the stint, I still think Charles is a P5, is a P6 tomorrow. I don't think he has the pace to get back to the podium, but I don't think Charles is anyone that's going to finish. Look, I still think one of the Ferraris finishes in front of the Aston Martins tomorrow. I still think that Aston Martin really struggles um, to be able to get that tire to work over a full stint.
Yeah. I think those are great points. I think the longevity of the tire wear here is what we really need to focus on. I think the kind of going back to, you know, uh, Alex Albon being Mr. Saturday, or even George being Mr. Saturday in that Williams, but then when it came to race time, almost inevitably sliding back down the pack. And that was really kind of because these tire, this is a race, it's not a
Yep.
sprint, you know, figuratively speaking. So in terms of our P10 pick for us, the
Yep.
person we think will finish last in the points, I'm a little bit torn on this one. We have three cars that are prohibitive top 10 cars that finished not didn't even make it to Q3, and that was Perez, which we need to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
The Ferrari, and then both of the Ferraris. So, what are we thinking for who's last in the points tomorrow?
I mean, I think Perez has a shot to be last in the points. I think Alonso could be last in the points. I really think Alonso slides backwards tomorrow because three main reasons. One, that upgrade that they seems to have brought to the car does not seem to have made the car any faster. They brought an upgrade in Imola, and it does not seem to have helped the car move forward. Point two, if any team struggles with degradation more than any other team, Aston Martin struggles with deg. Even though they get the tire in the right working window for one lap, they fail to get the right tire in the right working window for an entire stint, right, for multiple laps. I don't think they've solved that problem. And when we're talking about the teams did not have FP1 and FP2 to really get set up in a right place. So we're going into this pretty blind for a team that's seen really bad tire deg issues in the past on a race where the one stop is faster. Yeah, I don't see Aston Martin doing particularly well tomorrow. I think they qualified well, but if Alonso's able to hang into the points, that's going to be a win for them. Um, and I
Wow.
think the third piece is, strategy wise, they're not always making the best calls. So I'm not necessarily an Aston fan. I see them finishing P10. I think Perez's day got a lot harder when the Ferraris qualified outside of Q3. That means he's going to either have to pass the two Ferraris, which I think is going to be a struggle in a track where the DRS might be powerful, but overtaking is still going to be a challenge. Um, he's going to struggle to be in the points. But I think Perez has a fast car. I think he's good on his tires, right? We know that Perez doesn't seem to put a lot of energy on corner exit. Car doesn't seem to slide around a lot when he's driving. So, he might be a driver that's able to make that one stop work pretty aggressively. Um, I would expect that as we look at tires going into the race tomorrow, that Perez will run probably a counter strategy to the rest of the field. I think most of the field will do medium to hard one stop. I could see Perez doing the opposite, putting on the hard tire at the beginning of the race, struggling through that first stint until the people in front of him stop, and then trying to go long and bolt on the medium or the soft for the end of the race. It'll be interesting to see what the Ferraris do. I think with the Ferraris in the place that they're in, it might make sense to split the strategy, put Charles on the medium, put Sainz on the hard, kind of split the two cars between there. But tomorrow's, I think, going to be one of the better strategy races because one, we know Red Bull doesn't like the hard tire. So we know Max is going to need as big of a gap on that medium as he can. So when he puts on that hard, he's not struggling. I think if anything he's learned from Imola, it's that, if you work if you work the hard tire too hard at the beginning of the stint, it can degrade really, really kind of badly at the end. So I expect Mac to have learned from Imola to be able to kind of be able to eke this hard tire out. I expect Lando to be there, though. I expect Piastri to really be pushing Lando potentially on for a second podium in a row. So, um, yeah, I tomorrow's a good race. Max will bully George into turn one. He's a bully. That's what he does. He gets good starts. He bullies people off of the apex in turn one. Like that's what Max does. So let's not overthink this. Max at 145. Let's go 4 for 4.
Yeah, let's go 4 for 4. So the P1 picks going into the Canadian Grand Prix, we have Yuki Tsunoda points finish. That's minus 160 odds. And his performance has been consistent. Next one we have is Lando Norris minus 200 to finish on the podium. McLaren has shown strong performance. He finished P3 in qualifying. I feel like that's a strong bet for us. And then finally, the winning margin is under 5 seconds. That's plus 250 odds. And as you can see, the field is a lot more wide open than expected. Whoever wins this, it's not going to be by a landslide. And I will let you, Harrison, now go with our final pick.
I think we can call the race right now. I think it's Max minus 145. I think that the McLarens are going to be strong tomorrow. Lando in particular is going to be able to push Max a lot, but I think this is a lot like Imola. Just because you're able to be a second behind with a DRS doesn't necessarily mean you're able to outbrakes Max in a turn one, right? This is one where I think the Max factor gets it done. I think the car has great pace on the high speed section. I think they've helped the car over the bumps a little bit, and I think strategically they make pretty good calls. I think Max one stops medium to hard, probably goes a little bit longer on the medium to protect the hards, and I just think their pace on the soft and medium tire is just stronger than where the McLaren is right now. So I like Max at minus 145. I think he gets by George, whatever. I think
You love Greg Russell, let me tell
Greg
you.
Russell. I think he gets by George, probably going into the first corner, and I think George probably plays a little bit of a back blocker to the McLarens, giving Max probably the 3 seconds by lap 10 that he needs to kind of skip away. So that's kind of how I see the race going. Max has got good pace. He's going to work for it. I think it'll be close with the McLarens at the end. I think they'll have great pace on the hards. But yeah, Max to win at minus 145 seems like a lock city.
Lock City, that's what we like to hear. All right, so this is your post qualifying Canadian Grand Prix race preview P1 Picks podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. We hope we make you some money this week now that we don't have the albatross that is Monaco as the race of record. I think we're going to do really well. And honestly, qualifying could not have gone better for our early in the week picks. And I think the Max Verstappen additional one is going to absolutely crush for tomorrow. So thank you, Harrison. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And we will follow up with you guys after we have a new Canadian Grand Prix winner. Let's go.
Woo, let's go.